Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to the channel if you are new, and if you are not, welcome back. I don't do a whole lot of these breakdown videos, but with the recent influx of people who are fans of the Civvie 11 breakdown, or Civvie 11 songs that I do, edits, whatever you want to call them, I figured I'd put one of these out, and had mentioned such on one of the previous songs. And I did this once prior for the Arcanum OST re-edit stuff that I'd put out on a separate playlist. But these were a long time ago, and I've done a lot of not only upgrading with the DAW that I use, which is Ableton, but also plugins and just knowledge of what I'm doing and mixing to a certain degree, but also just application of all this stuff has gotten better over the roughly 9 to 10 months since I started doing it back then in 2020. So, but thanks to all the new guys who came flooding in for the Civvie 11 stuff, wanted to give a shout out to my buddy Charlie over at The Man, The Mish, The Legend, who helps me do a lot of just the kind of second guessing, bouncing ideas off of type situations that I use with him as far as, trying to figure out what sounds better or worse whenever I come to him for certain things. But he's also a good friend of mine, best friend even. So if you go to his channel, The Man, The Mish, The Legend, he does, I would say, even much better mixes than what I do. He doesn't put out as much because he's still in school at the moment. But outside of that, go give him some love. Other than that, definitely I'm going to continue with the Civvie projects. Kind of at this point, I've used most of what I can from his videos, and what that usually amounts to in that sense is whenever I go through and I do one video per cut per song or track or whatever, and what a lot of that boils down to is like a minute, maybe a minute and a half of usable stuff, because what I don't use is, if you go back and watch the first, or listen to the first record, which there's another one, if anyone didn't know, there's a first version that's first record of the Civvie stuff, which there's, I think, more than double the amount of. It's like 14 tracks. But the consensus through all of this with the vocal stuff is not to use things that involve the game, anything with licensing, anything that has music in it from other stuff that would conflict otherwise with what I'm using, which I still end up using certain things where you can hear music in it vocal wise, but it is what it is. And nothing that's like too meta. What I try to use is just him talking, and doing kind of like the backdrop banter that you would say. So like when he says shit like, oh shit, or that's weird, or something like that. And that's what I try to go for. And there's surprisingly little of that even with each one. And you know, you don't want to use the game, you don't want to use sound effects, all that sort of stuff. And you can, but it is what it is for what I do. And I've kind of gone through most of his stuff, being that like almost 20 at this point. I think over 20 actually, of all the things that I've done as far as his videos. And a lot of the ones I haven't used are much smaller, not really enough content to use, or larger that just has a lot of in-game footage. Like the new release he did, that was the bundle one that had a bunch of stuff he did, like various ones he's done before, where it's mostly just straight demos. There's not a lot of meta in-game humor, fourth wall stuff that he does that I use. So going on from that, I will keep doing more of these, however, in whatever fashion, but just whenever he puts more stuff out, I guess is the end game on that one. And one of the big reasons I wanted to wait to do the upgrade for this was because, or the breakdown video for the new stuff, was because I had not only gotten to a new spot with learning much more comparatively to when I did the last breakdown video over half a year ago for the other projects, but also finished up doing my splice rentals, as well as subscribing for a what would you call it, like a mix master subscription through Plugin Alliance. So upgraded a bunch of stuff, and I've kind of been trying to wrap my head through all of it, a lot of it being like new EQs, new limiters, masters, that sort of stuff, compression, that sort of stuff. So trying to wrap my head around that, and finally had a chance to use that with proper grouping that I normally don't do for the stuff that I was even doing with this particular Civvie release. So this is kind of like, I would say, probably a better example of how I'm going to go forward with what I'm doing currently compared to trying to demo one of his other stuff. So you've probably heard this is the last track that came out as far as the chronologically, I guess would be the proper way to say it, in real time that came out. It's not the last track on the record that got put in, but it is the last one that got made, that got added. This was Cancer Lady, and this would be the Doom 2 movie review that I used for this one. So you've probably already heard the song, so I don't need to play the whole thing back to back, but I've already gone over kind of what I use for, and don't use, I guess, for the Civvie vocal stuff. But we can go through and show you what I use as far as my groups first. So kind of what I end up doing, shouldn't say kind of, but like definitively what I try to do with, for instance, drums being one. I need to start doing one for bass, but I was a little intimidated because these were all a little different. So these are all not grouped together with their own subgroup, but guitar has its own subgroup, vocals has its own subgroup, and each one of these will have its basic chain of what I'll use. They're all a little bit different. So for the drum, and this isn't a definitive version, I'm actually using this based off of a setup that demo Joe, that a guy named Joe was doing through Plugin Alliance. So this is more or less based off of what he was doing, and it's not 100%, and I'm still learning every day what I need to do to improve all this, because this is all learning experience for me. But currently at this point in time, as far as the groups go, what I did for this one at least, I have the drum bus, shouldn't say drum and bass because I took the bass off, but just the drums set up on their own bus. With compression, I had a saturator doing some kind of colorization prior to it, but not on this one. I took it off. But yeah, compression, master compression, limiter, or EQ, and then limiter at the very end. Kind of the same process with just different stuff on each other group. So with guitar, I have the pre-Triday through Arturia, starting off with preamp, channel strip. It's a little bit of subtractive EQing, although this is a little bit more brighter. I shouldn't say super subtractive. This is just cutting out the low end, essentially. There's nothing major going on here. Just adding it before compression. Compression from SPL Iron, running that through. And I kind of have a passive EQ with Mag E4 with just the air and gain up higher for the high end with the guitar, before the main EQ that's doing the rest of what I want with Millennia, or I should say the Insect 2. And of course Pro L2 through for our limiter from Fab Filter. And I think Pro L2 is what's on all of the limiters on all the groups at least. Or for everything for that matter, at least what I used on this. Vocal group, kind of the same deal. Pro Q3, Lindell being our preamp. These are all channel stripped, each stem, so I just used a preamp for each one of these, a little different one. So for guitar, I had the Lindell 80 bus preamp. Q3 for subtractive, a little bit. SPL Iron for compression, Mag again for air, and L2 for limiting. vocal group was that one. And then keys. And then keys slash kind of high-end, more pad string stuff. I could probably have keys in a separate one from pad strings, but for this project, I had it in one group. Have the Lindell 20 or 254E doing a little bit of preamping. Nothing going on with the rest of the stuff. A little bit of Q4 to cut the low end out, or Q3. C2 from Fab Filter for compression, although there's very, very little actual compression going on here, at least for this bus. Q3 AMAC 200 EQ. I don't know why I say Q3. And this isn't doing a whole lot except cutting this part out here for some of the higher vocal stuff. L2, and of course. So, going through that, the placement of the vocals really just, I guess I'd probably start with vocals on this, would just kind of just depend really on delivery. I mean, that's just comedic tonal awareness. I don't know anything about it. I'm not a stand-up, but like just trying to fit them in where they fit, not only with the metronome or the beat, so to speak, but also with like how it sounds like someone would try to say it. These aren't cross-faded in any major way, but there's enough going on where I don't worry too much about these as far as that goes. But there's probably a lot more going on here than either maybe I would say needs to be, but a lot of this really is just random effects stuff that's cued in at one point or time. Pretty much none of this is going on all at the same time. Although I do have a compressor going on here and a compressor going through here, so maybe I don't need to double up too much with that. It's probably, honestly, I think a lot of this ended up being a little bit too loud on most anything but the drum section. That's probably why it's a little over compressed. And for purposes of hearing it, let's turn off the compression on the master chain so that when that kicks in, we don't have to worry about it. So turn that off. And that's the EQ. Yeah, there we go. And turn that off. And leave the master on. Compression is off though, so that way it doesn't overpower everything. But yeah, basically with the only vocal, I don't know why it says lead. I think at one point I had a potential to put in more stuff and do some chorusy things, but essentially had channel strip start off with Novel Tech doing a little enhancing in the mid region. And then the rest of this basically is just augmenting random things. This is doing a preset for morphing sound, which is kind of going down the chain here. Sauce is what is making the vocal shifting go down as far as... let's see. That actually happens quite a bit. So you have to give me one sec. So that was Sauce. And Sauce is from DJ Swivel. It's a little bit finicky of a program because I think it's a CPU hog. And occasionally I have to deal with this sort of stuff when it comes to that. So restart it. And that's what I'm using for the pitch shifting when everything goes low, like he's got the witness protection program sound effect on. Saturn, there's a version of Saturn that's on that's trying to give it a little more fullness, for lack of a better term. And then there's another after that in the chain, which is giving it a telephone style effect. And a lot of these are just added in for random effect to modulate the vocals in some way to spice everything up, because there's only one vocal take. There's also a widener that I use stereo wise through Valhalla delay when you hear the vocals kind of get panned off stereo wise to the right and left. That's what's giving it that effect. And it's ran through some vintage verb as far as the reverb goes. So and then probably some compression. I think I was using Opto compression. And let's see what else was running on this. Chorus Dimension D from Arturia. Effects rack. At the very beginning of these, I have a tendency to use the Echo processor, the analog one from through Echo Boy Jr. With the kind of intercom sound effect at the beginning. Timeless 3, which is giving it a little bit more breathability on the higher end. Of course, Valhalla Vintage Verb, as I had mentioned. And at the very beginning, there is also auto filter, which is what's making the voice and I believe the guitar also come in not at full volume, but also just give it that like intro sound. So breaking it down back to back, let's do it with the vocals first.
I don't know. Check it out. Here we go. You son of a bitch.
So what you're seeing there, if you look down here at the very bottom, you'll see the curvature from the auto filter go up from a lower hertz to a higher hertz range.
I don't know. Check it out. Here we go.
And basically that's just to keep it from like going in immediately from jump and hit you at full frequency. And it's very simple curvature if you look right here. So excluding that, the very end of this has a nice whoosh effect that's actually from the vocal sample itself.
You son of a bitch.
That shh. So I ended up using that as a little transition piece. You're hearing the effect rack also with the kind of vocal delay bounce ping pong. I think it's ping pong. Yeah, ping pong.
Check it out. Here we go.
And that's just applied to the very beginning. The rest of it, I believe, is using Timeless for its main delay function for whatever it's giving delay-wise.
Liberal, politically correct environment. You're sitting there and you're going, what?
So as you hear there in these parts where he goes,
what?
Versus the very beginning.
You're sitting there and you're going, what?
That's the Valhalla giving a little bit of vocal width as far as pitching it. Not really pitching it as far as anything major goes, but just spreading it out. And that's just to give it a little effect. All these ones are just to give some kind of effect, comedic or otherwise.
Exhibit A. This lady is dying and holy shit.
Same there.
She made a racist joke on Twitter. Oh, it's her.
And as you can hear there with the pitch shifting, that's the sauce doing its thing. That's basically it. There's one part, I believe, here.
No, get that lady dying of cancer out of here.
Which is Saturn running through a preset called Antique Box, which is just kind of giving it a lo-fi kind of telephony sound. Basic premise, you probably already heard the rest of it, but that's the vocal breakdown for it. When I started up with the new stuff and some other projects a couple of months ago, I had recently invested in putting in a pickup, specifically a K&K transducer pickup on my acoustic, which is a Martin LMX, or LXM, I should say, which is a little travel-sized Martin. I used nickel wound strings on it, but got the transducer pickup installed in it because I wanted to plug it through the Focusrite, which is what I use for all my analog to or direct to digital audio transformer, whatever the fuck you want to call it, which had really good quality, even though before I was using my microphone, which is a Neumann TLM 102, I believe. So still really good quality, but wanted to have a direct input. And it sounded really good. Started using it on all the new stuff I was doing and started implementing it then on the new Civvie release. So all the new Civvie stuff, unlike the previous record, which was a lot more EDM, fast-paced, some people would akin it to listening to Aphex Twins, although he's much better than I am on all levels. Just different, I would say, kind of slower paced, there's acoustic on all the new tracks. There's much less stem work going on as far as how many stems are on or per track. I have to say each one of these being a little stem. And just placements, trying to like separate everything so it's not just 8 bars of this, then 8 bars of that, then 8 bars of this, but like have everything kind of move from one section to another. And breaking up the pattern of the main guitar parts, not just having the same part play through all the time. So started off with this on the new one, and there's an instrumental version for this if you want to go listen to it. It's on the channel. It's redone a little bit dB wise so that the main guitar isn't panned as much, because the guitars here are panned 14 left and right, so quite a bit but not a bunch. So everything's redid a little bit, and I take the drums off the instrumental stuff because I think the drums are mostly there to keep drive with the main song. So when I do the instrumentals, I mostly just incorporate the leads and maybe whatever transient higher stuff like pads, pianos, or whatever gets accompanied with it. So there's 2 parts here, and essentially what's going on starting off is the Lindell 80 channel, which I love because it has a really nice high-end brightness function to it. This is actually set off for some weird reason. Probably because it reset. But let's see if it happened to this one. Yeah, see, it's so weird. So sometimes it just ends up doing that for some odd, weird reason. Oh, wait, no, I didn't do it because it was the low-end function. So that's fine. So we'll leave it as it is. And just before you see the auto filter doing some stuff, just gradually gliding in. And what we have is compression through the C2 fab filter and just basic stuff. Switching off between Valhalla delay through one of their presets, Phaser Brilliant Guitar, which is really nice. Not really a whole lot of fancy stuff going on, just a minimal bit of spread. No, 1/4 note signature, lower-ish mix, but you get that through these more subtle parts at the beginning. And that's running through with some Valhalla Vintage Verb doing just kind of a bright hall function. Switched it up, put the decay a little bit lower, pre-delay a little bit lower, but nothing fancy. And that's going to switch off between this section and then the next one where I'll have the phaser automated off and then go into a chorus ducking kind of. Oh wait, actually no, that's the riff part. So this is just a delay, tape delay function. All Valhalla as far as I know. There we go. So yeah, the pitch duck. It's gonna kick in for the first time when it comes on. So you'll hear the spreaded. And then usually at the end of these I'll have the mix go higher with the basic reverb or whatever reverb's going through it. Yeah, we'll increase there. So you hear all of that and then mixed together with the riffs, which isn't doing anything super fancy, just on the other side on the right hand. There's even less going on here because I wanted it to be a little more clean with the high end. It's a little bit higher cut with the filter dB. Using VSM3 from Vertigo to do a little bit of side kind of harmonic distortion, but not really a whole lot. Just a little bit of flavor, but barely any to notice too much. A little bit of compression and a Hall Verb through Valhalla. and then together by themselves. And all these after about 8 bars change up. The riff stays the same for this part, it goes to the next part. And then for our last part. Going from there, I wanted to do bass. I don't normally do a lot of bass, at least for the new Civvie EP, but I did for this one and did 3 different parts. These are not with the instrumental, nor is the drums, but by themselves, they're mostly nothing too crazy going on. Each one of them is running through console in as far as the channel strip goes. And then I think we have Pigments for our first, Mini V through the V8 or V7, or is it V8 collection through Arturia, and then Pigments again. Nothing special, just basically some, I think each one has sub-synth filter doing some sub-harmonics and some change with the frequencies down here on each one. A little bit of flavor through Triad, just doing some passes, give it some nice sounds. Compression, C2. Some of these might have phaser, little bit of verb, not a whole lot. And then because they're not chained, or I shouldn't say chained, not through a subgroup or a group, I have them all done with EQing and limiting at each one at the end of the stem. So by themselves, nothing crazy, mostly just there to give it a little bit of thump in the background. Again, kind of the same with the drone. And it's interesting to try to do this where it doesn't bleed into the actual decibel amount, but also is more separate from anything else happening. I try to separate through a little bit of subtractive, basic subtraction EQing to get rid of the separation of the bass line from the actual guitar acoustic from the bass line itself. And I'm going to invest here through Plugin Boutique on Track Spacer that'll hopefully help me a little bit more with that. But that being said, and then the last one. Again, not too much. Just something to have to give it a little bit of boost. And of course, if you listen to it, each one goes through a thing, a little bit more of a, and you say like chill, driving, almost hip hop kind of beat with more strict house and then kind of jungle style. So I wanted to just switch it up and those kind of add to it. The samples for the kicks and drums, snare and hi-hats that I used didn't change too much, if at all, I think, actually, between each set, but I did try to switch up the air quotes beat as much as possible. And so in our drum bus, again, nothing too crazy, kind of just basic little funky beat. And then going from there to kind of more straight house. And what's causing that to go with the hi-hats is Spec Ops, I believe. Where is it at? Yeah, unfiltered. And all this is doing is just covering a little section here to give it a little bit more of a distorted future sound, just to flavor it up so it's not the same. And that applies a little bit more so when it hits the jungle section, essentially. Yeah. Nothing too crazy. Oops. And try to give the kick themselves, or kick itself, a little bit more thump. And I got help from my buddy, the man, the myth, the legend, with that, as far as chaining different compressors together to give it a little bit more thump. So with Opto on one chain with the kick and Purple Audio MC on the other, just to give it some more, little bit of thump. Again, still a learning process for me to get all this down. So moving on from there, we have the application of higher end stuff such as keys and I'd say like the strings, flutes, pads, that sort of stuff, that end up kind of going between, not really between anything, pretty much on the very ends as far as what I try to add, panning wise, stereo wise. So with this, nothing too crazy. Lindell 254E for preamp, a little bit of Q3 before compression for subtraction, EQing. Again, I kind of already gone over that a little bit, shown you. And then the EQ to kind of take out the section where the vocals would normally come in on the high end. Starting off, have addition of keys that are running through stage 73, which is through the V collection, again by Arturia, so it's giving that kind of Fender Rhodes sound. Which just gives it kind of a nice little transient sound on the side. Running through the SSL 9000J, C2 again for compression, and then using a bucket brigade through digital delay here that will come in after the 8 bars. And that running through Vintage Verb as well. I love that little almost stereo sound delay. Very smooth, very nice. Moving on from there, then we hit the house music section, which just has a pad using the Mini V3 kind of Moog emulator. And I didn't really add too much more to this because there's already a lot going on here as far as effects and modulation. Although I turned the chorus and I don't think filter was even on for this one. So I ended up just, again, running it through the usual channel strip and just adding a little bit of chorus. And all these choruses, when they're applied, usually have some kind of automation going on that's making them do something, usually output mix or something like that. Moving on from there, we go to strings, and this is my strings. I kind of have two options at this point. I can either use the, what is it called? It's actually a free one that I actually like a lot. The Spitfire Labs, which is free, which has a really decent orchestral selection that I use. But for this one, for more old-timey kind of background vibe, I went with the Mellotron, which has a really decent sound for that. Never mind, it always gives me that when I do that. It's so weird. Which is... just kind of that old-timey vibe. Running it through RC20 for a little bit more kind of color. And Valhalla Delay, I believe Magic Air, which is just kind of giving it a little bit of bounce between, and Valhalla Delay, Vintage Verb. And so all of these back to back pretty decently line up with each other. Again, I would want to probably in the future do a little bit more care with the decibels as far as trying to bring out more of the drums and less of the transient and or main lead parts, because I think they were a little bit louder than they should be. Running on master with the rest of this, I have Black Box doing a little bit of just a little bit of kind of like side flavor colorization, more width. Compression using Vertigo 2 via C2. Better Maker, which is set to a kind of more slope with a little bit brighter end on the low and high. Not much more. It's just kind of more of a passive EQ. Master Desk is the master, obviously. L2 for limiting, which I probably don't need really, because I think there's a fine enough limiter. No, maybe not a limiter included on that. I think there is, but either way, have it L2 on there just for shits and gigs. And then using AB metric to run for spectrum and loudness and dynamics and stuff like that. It's basically a spectral analyzer is what I use it for. And all in all, that is what makes up a Civvie 11 song. I don't do too much anything as far as auto-tuning the vocals. That would be a lot of work, and I have considered using it more with something like Ovox from Waves, which I did get recently and used for like kind of a brief bridge section-ish for one of the songs off the EP. And have considered using him for like a whole talk box thing with like a theme instead of how I do it where it's cut. And I've thought about it, but it's going to have to take a little bit more learning on my part as far as using the application of MIDI input to do the vocal work, because it is basically vocoding it essentially at that point. But something to keep in mind. And of course have interest in putting more out whenever he puts more stuff out. Anything else really on the channel is stuff that I do in my free time for me. I'm trying to get more into vocal stuff and working with my buddy on that I mentioned earlier. So probably more of that to come in the future. Any more Civvie stuff I have, I'll probably just drop on the EP that is currently out now. And at some point do another segment to just put everything new at that point into like a new record or whatever you want to call it, just to keep them separated. But other than that, that pretty much rounds out what goes into all of this. And it's still a learning process for me, so this is just where I am versus where it was when I had last did one of these videos a long time ago. So might do more for the Civvie stuff, but other than that, just wanted to get this out there so that you can kind of see what goes into it if you are interested. Either way, I hope everyone takes it easy, and talk to you again if we see you again. Late.